All right, well, I guess I'm live. So, hi, my name is Pernell Plathmeyer, and I am the author of the new book called In Our Bones. Looks like it's backward in the video, though. So, I thought I would take some time to discuss my book a little bit, going through each chapter, some of the reasons behind, some of the content, maybe some of the personal stories of mine as to why that felt relevant. Let's see what else, just kind of anything about the novel that comes to mind. So as an FYI, I had anticipated doing a number of these types of videos, and I had anticipated doing something a little more scripted and a little more, where I kind of knew exactly what I was going to say. This is not going to be that. This is going to be kind of winging it just off the top of my head as I have things come to mind. So bear with me as we muddle through this here together. So I thought I'd start by talking about chapter 1. And that one is, obviously chapter 1. The title of that one is called The TVs Went Blank. And so in this chapter, we meet our protagonist. Her name is Lauren. And Lauren is someone who at least I could personally relate to, and that was important to me to write a character that was someone who I liked and someone whose story felt like relevant, I guess, something that I could grab onto. So Lauren's a very imperfect person. So in terms of relating to her, that is one way that I relate to her. I don't feel that, I have it all figured out, and that I don't think many of us do. So, I wanted to create a character who was not coming into the novel as this fully formed human. She had a lot of personal growth that she needed to undertake. So we have Lauren. We meet her. We open the novel. She's waking up with a pretty significant hangover. Lauren is drinking quite a bit. She's struggling with her own mental health, with some depression, anxiety, and things like that, some PTSD that's not been treated. And she's just kind of struggling. She makes a lot of bad choices in her life in terms of relationships and men and things like that. She doesn't really know what direction she's headed. So that's how we open the novel. So we meet Lauren. She's getting ready for her first shift at work, and she's not really wanting to go into work that day because somebody else called in. So we meet Lauren as she's kind of getting ready to go into work that day, and we sort of go through things with her. Her job is at a bar. She's a waitress, and I felt it was also important to have my character have a job that was just a normal job. She's not some highfalutin professional. She's just her. Okay. So, but I'm also, of course, this novel, my motivations for writing it were numerous. So, I'd written an article about why, why did I write this? And I'll just give a brief story of that. So I wrote this starting in, was it July or late June, July of 2019. And the reason I started it was because a lot of things were kind of coming together around that time for me. So I had, I'm a news junkie. I've been following news forever. And obviously the news is not super pleasant. So that was upsetting in and of itself. But, I kind of had developed some skills to deal with that emotionally. I'm normally not real crushed down by the news. I can kind of read even pretty awful things and sort of let it go, not let it nestle into my heart. But I was having a harder time doing that back last summer, and the summer before that. So I had been listening to some podcasts, and I really like how podcasts can go very in depth on a subject. So some of the subjects I've been following for years were the rise of white nationalism, the effects of climate change, and obviously with our president, concerns about his pretty obvious authoritarian tendencies. He doesn't even really hide it too much. So I was hearing a lot of the things that he was saying and very concerned about them and concerned about this election and whether or not he would concede to the results if he, in fact, lost. I was also concerned that there would be so much election interference that we might not really know who won the election on election night on November 3rd, and that would sow confusion that the president could exploit. So these were some concerns of mine, all of them kind of coming together right about the same time in a way that I wasn't able to manage it anymore. So I was also dealing with some personal stuff, going through a divorce and some different things. And, my resources just weren't great, to say the least. And so all of these things were kind of coming together at this time. And, my depression just kind of went through the roof. So I was spending a lot of time in bed and I was crying a lot. And I think, the primary concern was, what kind of a future are my children going to have if all of these things that I'm concerned about come to pass? So we've got all these different intersections of white nationalism, authoritarianism, climate change, and I know from my own background in mental health, which I've done a lot of work with my kids around mental health issues and struggling with my own issues of depression and, kind of coming to a better place with that in my life. So I knew from my experience that the best way to deal with depression is to actually do something about the things you're depressed about, rather than just sitting around worrying about it. So I decided, okay, I have to do something. What am I going to do? That was the big issue. What am I going to do? So I didn't really know at that time. At first, maybe I thought, well, maybe I could write some like academic articles on this stuff, like newsy kind of things, nonfiction. And that was kind of the direction I was going, but it just felt not very fun and kind of overwhelming because, in order to write nonfiction, you have to have a citation for each and every fact. But part of the issue I was dealing with is that, I'd been a stay-at-home mom for 20 years, obsessively listening to public radio and reading news and all of this. Half the time, I'm not even entirely sure where a fact maybe had come from that was in my head. And so the prospect of digging up every fact to do a citation as you would in an academic piece was just, it was too much. I wasn't going to do that. So, and also it's boring. I mean, who wants to sit around and read all of these, academic pieces? Some nerds do. Sure, I kind of like a lot of that stuff, but who else? So I wanted to write something that was more engaging, that's something that people could maybe relate to a little more, have a little more interest in. So that's why, I hadn't settled on fiction, but I was kind of sort of leaning in that direction when I was sitting around my house one night just chilling. I had a couple beers and just relaxing, and then just like, I don't know, it was really strange. It was like, I can't describe it exactly, but it was like all of a sudden the content of my novel, like the basic storyline, the structure, the plot, all of this just sort of came to me in just an instant almost. I mean, it was kind of striking how it happened. And people keep encouraging me to write another novel, and I'm like, I don't know, because that one, it all came to me and no other story is coming to me. So I don't know if I'll write another novel. But this story came to me in one night and changed very little over the course of the little over a year that it took me to write it. So that's why I wrote this piece. And what it did for me personally was it got me out of bed and it got me focused again on solutions and what I could do to address the problems. So it was a very grueling process, I will say. It took a lot more out of me than I had anticipated when I started. And I had a lot to learn that I didn't realize. Writing fiction is a lot different than writing academically. You have to be interesting and you have to have it be fun and people have to like your characters and you have to have a story arc and all this stuff that I didn't know about. So it was a pretty difficult process to learn all of that in order to write this book. The other thing that was difficult was the content. It was pretty challenging to live for so long in this post-apocalyptic world that I created, in this daily basis of thinking through horrible violent scenes and rape scenes and awful things that happen to people and horrible racial slurs and horrible words about women and, all this stuff. And it was depressing in its own way, but it was depressing in a different way because it was still goal-oriented. It wasn't this kind of depression that just felt like there's no point. You're just sitting there doing nothing. So I think in that respect, it was really good for me personally to write this novel. But yeah, it was not an easy process. So with that in mind, I thought maybe I'd read a little bit of a section from the first chapter. So again, we have Lauren. She's waking up, just for those of you who are just tuning in. So my main character is a woman named Lauren. She's, just to reiterate a little bit, she's a very troubled person. She's got a lot of struggles. And she's woken up. The novel opens with her waking up with a hangover. So then she's getting ready to go to work. Doesn't want to go to work, and it's election day 2022. So this novel is set 2 years in the future from now. It's after, we're going to presume, President Trump somehow has stayed in power. I'm going to go into that a little bit in this reading about kind of some ideas how he might be able to stay into power. But let me just jump in the reading. So, okay. After the president's controversial and highly contested re-election in 2020, his frothing supporters were emboldened. At the bar that night, they were making their opinions clear to anyone within earshot. The president's claim to victory was suspect and highly contested. He'd appointed one of his cronies to run the Postal Service, thus ensuring the flood of mail-in ballots spurred on by the virus wouldn't arrive in time to be counted. The president also put out his marching orders to his party and supporters across the land: suppress the vote through any means available, close any polling places in poor and non-white communities, and make voting harder. The president and his bootlicking attorney general sent their private military force to harass voters at polling places and encouraged his minions to join in the fracas. The president's favorite foreign dictators assisted with an all-out campaign of disruption, and the fate of the country was fractured. When the president pulled ahead in early in-person vote counts on election night, he said that the opposition party was trying to steal the election and no other votes should be counted. His hand-picked Supreme Court backed him, and the military stayed silent. Protests lasted for months, but were eventually crushed in all but the most tenacious quarters. The actual Civil War had started years before most Americans were paying attention, though, as attacks had been increasing across the country. So I'll leave that there. So that's kind of my outline of how I think, or how I was envisioning this could happen. With the hand-picked Supreme Court, we're clearly seeing that with literally today. Amy Coney Barrett was confirmed, and so now we've got a 6-3 conservative majority. We also know that Justice Kavanaugh, who was a very controversial pick, that he also, in his opinion about something that just came out, I apologize, I can't quite remember what the news story was, but in any event, his opinion that just came out is worrying a lot of people because he's essentially indicating that, vote stealing or that he concurred with the decision in Florida that allowed George W. Bush to become president. And stopping vote counts. So I think we have a lot of reason to believe that the Supreme Court is going to be on his side. And that's, concerning. So even if Roberts sides with the liberals, we'll still have Trump in power because of that. So we've got that. Let's see what else. The military has also been very clear that they are not planning on having any role in this election. And we know that the president, if we could see, from the protests around Portland and the George Floyd situation, that there was a private military force that he had purchased somehow. Nobody knows how. But these are Eric Prince's people. So Betsy DeVos is the Secretary of Education, and her brother is a man named Eric Prince. And Prince had run Blackwater Security, I think it was called, who did a lot of really bad stuff in Iraq. And he had to I think his company had to close because they did so many horrible things. So then he reformed as another company, and now that's who we've got running the president's private police force. So we still know very, very little about this force. Unfortunately, we have a system in our country, and this is what President Trump is able to exploit so effectively, is that up until Trump, most presidents followed norms out of a sense of duty, decency, obligation, morality, perhaps. I don't really know why, but they were not narcissistic psychopaths. And the thing that I am trying to do with my novel, and that I've spent a lot of time thinking about over these last 4 years, is how narcissists are able to violate norms and break rules and get their way, in part because they're willing to do these things that other people would be absolutely mortified. Saying some of the things that come out of the president's mouth, most people would maybe be a little embarrassed to say some of those things. The flagrant lying, the rule breaking, these things, people would have a sense of, or most people would have a sense of like, we feel bad when we do bad things to other people, and we don't want other people to feel bad, right? Okay? That's normal brains. Narcissists do not have the same cognitive capacity that we have. Their entire worldview is focused on themselves, how they can get what they want, and how they can get ahead. And they literally do not possess the portion of their brain that quote unquote normal people have that self-regulate. So that embarrassment, that sense of decency, narcissists do not possess that in the same way that other people do. So of course the president doesn't care if he violates rules. He doesn't care what anyone thinks of him, ultimately, in the sense that he doesn't care if he's a decent human. That's maybe different. Most people want to be decent. To him, what he wants is adoration, but not out of being decent. It's just he just wants people to adore him, because that's what narcissists want. They want the constant feedback because their hearts are so shallow. They can't buoy themselves the way most people can. They need intensive feedback from other people. And I understand the president, I think, better than maybe most people do, because I've had a long line of narcissists in my life, unfortunately, and I've had to deal with that personally. How does a narcissistic person think and behave, and how does that affect those around them? And so when the president came on the scene, I already had quite a bit of experience dealing with narcissists, so it was not surprising to me, his behavior and the things that he was doing. And so it's also incredibly unsurprising to me that he does not care about any norm violation. And so presidents in the past did care about these things. He does not. And so that has, most of our, not our laws, but much of the way the presidency operates, much of the way the government operates, is based upon norms, not laws. But no president prior to Trump had thought to not follow them, because of these things. They were not narcissists. So maybe they want, or maybe a few of them have been, I'm sure some of them have been. But, they, at least not to the extent of Trump. I mean, he is clearly not only just narcissistic, but sociopathic as well. But, they weren't doing these things. And we didn't notice as citizens because it was all good, right? But now we have a president who just doesn't, I'm going to swear on this, I don't care. He doesn't give a fuck. He doesn't care what happens to anyone. He will burn this motherfucking country down so that he gets what he needs. And that is the continuation of his power. the continuation of his adoration from the small group of people who adore him. And narcissists often insulate themselves with a very small group of people who will do nothing but kiss their ass. And so we see that with Trump. He's isolated, or he's limited his circle to very few individuals. You could see with the Leslie Stahl interview on 60 Minutes, just a mildly difficult question. He's out of there. He can't handle it. And that's the other thing about narcissists. They cannot handle being challenged in any way. You start asking a narcissist too many questions, they will attempt to gaslight. If they can't gaslight, then what they will do, or, if you don't buy their gaslighting and you push back, then you're the bitch. You're the bad one. You're the one who has the problem. And so for Trump, of course, Leslie Stahl was a bitch. How dare she ask him questions? How dare she? He's only the president of the United States, for God's sakes. Shouldn't be asking any tough questions, apparently. But that's silly and that's immature. So where am I going with all this? So basically, President Trump is a narcissist. I'm concerned that with this election, he will have no compunction to follow any of the rules or the laws unless he is forced to. Because that's the other thing with narcissists, is they will push every boundary as far as they can until they're stopped. And so here we are as a nation, looking at this election a week from today. And it's frightening for a lot of us because we don't know what will happen as a result. I'm trying to hold on to some hope that at this point voter turnout is looking pretty good, and that hopefully there'll be more voter turnout. We haven't seen some of the horrific things that I had been worried about, like deep fake videos being put out on Biden, some of this stuff. So I think we have a good chance, America. I think we have a good chance of getting rid of this psychopath and bringing our country back. But, this is really going to require that all of us step forth in our own ways. Absolutely make sure you get out and vote. Like, there's really no excuse right now. And so that has to be your number one. The other thing is that, we have to be vigilant. And, November 3rd, we may not know the outcome of the election, but you bet your boots Trump is going to be out there that night, depending on the level of ambiguity of the results, that he's going to be claiming victory. And so we as citizens need to be aware that just because he says he won does not mean that he actually won. And so we have to be vigilant about that. And what does that mean? I don't know exactly what that's going to mean. I mean, obviously that's going to mean, continuing to keep in contact with our elected officials and encouraging them to hold the president accountable. I think it's also going to be quite likely protests in the streets. And I say that, and I know my conservative friends, anyone who is reading or who's watching this who supports the president, because I have a lot of you, and just shout out to, I love you too. I'm not going to let politics get in the way of our relationships, but obviously I don't like the president. So anyway, so when I say protesting in the street, I am referring to peaceful protesting, not looting, my dears. If you also look at the headlines, you will see that it was not Antifa and it was not black people who were out there burning shit down. Okay, probably some. But mostly, this was the white nationalists who were coming in and disrupting. And so we also have to be aware of that any protest, let me just double back for a second. The reason the white nationalists are jumping into these protests is to create chaos. So the president's entire strategy is to create as much chaos as possible. Because when there's chaos, that's when people like him can cling to power. When there's chaos, we get confused. When there's chaos, we don't know where the causes of that chaos are. And so sometimes we can turn against each other as Americans. And that's exactly what we saw with the George Floyd protests. Americans were coming together in an unprecedented way around the concept that police brutality cannot continue. We have to figure this out as a nation. We cannot allow these things to continue to go on that have been going on for, literally since the founding of our country, and we have to have a reckoning. So we were pretty damn united about this fact. But then what happens? What happens? This is great. You send in a fucking couple white nationalists, burn some shit down, loot some shit, create some problems, and then guess what? Yeah, some poor black people and poor white people and other minority folks, whoever, poor people in general, are going to jump in there and they're going to be getting shit too. Why? Well, because they're poor and because the window's broken and they're going to do it. Very small numbers, very small numbers. The vast majority of people who were involved in those protests were simply trying to do what was right. And then what you saw after that very, very small percentage of people went crazy and did the looting, prompted by the white nationalists, was it the very large majority of the community who are peaceful and caring and loving and want a good world. They were out there cleaning the streets. They were out there denouncing the looting. But it was very effective at making it so that suddenly we weren't so united anymore, were we? Suddenly, the horrible thing that happened to George Floyd wasn't, sorry, I'm getting a little emotional, wasn't the front and center of the news anymore, right? Now what are we talking about? Talking about the looting. Yeah. And so I think that we're going to have to be really careful about that after the election, because there's going to be a lot of that kind of stuff. And in my novel, The Rise of White Nationalist Militias is a pretty substantial, it's actually part and parcel of the entire novel. We've been seeing the rise of these militias for decades, literally decades. And under the Trump administration, he is tacitly supporting them. We saw in the first debate, stand down, stand by, to the Proud Boys, one of the militias. And, and President Trump says, oh, I don't know who they are. No, I'm pretty sure you know who they are, Mr. Trump. It's dog whistles nonstop to his militia base. Just, I think yesterday was again encouraging or supporting this lock her up chant in Michigan against the governor who there was a kidnapping attempt against, but there's no responsibility on his part for his rhetoric. And that is because he is a psychopathic narcissist. He does not care what happens to you. He does not care what happens to me. Frankly, he probably doesn't give a fuck what happens to his own children. He cares what happens to himself. The other thing about Trump that we also need to know is that the Southern District of New York has been investigating him and his family for at least 4 years, probably quite a bit longer. And the Justice Department came out with a memo back during the Nixon era that was intended to help get Spiro Agnew, if anybody remembers their history, he was the super corrupt vice president under Nixon. Super corrupt, shady dude. The Justice Department wanted to get rid of Agnew, okay? So they figured if they said to Nixon, who was also a corrupt motherfucker, if we go ahead and say to him, we're not going to indict a sitting president, let's just get rid of this vice president, Nixon would go along with it. Nixon did go along with it, but yet that memo exists today, and that's what the Justice Department is using as justification for why a sitting president cannot be charged. Many legal scholars think that's bullshit and not relevant, but, what are we going to do about that, right? So we're just normal citizens, but that's where they're at right now. There's nothing we can do about that at this moment. But if the president is no longer the president, he will almost certainly be facing indictment. And Trump is no fool. I think he's a fool. But he's not stupid. He knows that there's potential for charges. And, does he want to go to prison? Not so much. So it is very important to him to stay in power for that reason. So I think we all need to be very clear about that. The president knows he will likely go to prison if he's no longer president. What does a trapped animal do? Did they just chill? No, not so much, right? They lash out. And so I think that's what we're going to be seeing. So I'm supposed to be talking about my novel, but here I'm talking about all this politics, which my novel is politics, of course. But I guess what I'm just, giving some kind of background for that, just to kind of brace us as a nation for what's coming, because I think it could be pretty bad. And so there's that. Okay, so let's talk a little bit more about the chapter, shall we? Okay, so So I talked a little bit about Lauren, how she's kind of this fragile person. So Lauren, let me give you some background on the novel. So we have Lauren, who is about 20-something when the novel starts. Her sister Rachel, who's about 20 years older than she, and then her parents. Chapters on her parents and Rachel background stories are available on my website, inourbones.com. They did not make it into the final cut of the novel for a whole variety of reasons. But if you want background story on Rachel and her parents, check those out. They're in the deleted chapters section of the website. So we've got, but the chapter is really centering around Lauren. Actually, excuse me, the whole novel is really centering around Lauren. And Lauren, she's struggling, hasn't really gotten her life together. Rachel, on the other hand, has, degrees and traveled the world. She's got this good job, this really grounded person. And Rachel and her parents are pretty close, where Lauren is pretty strained from her entire family. For a variety of reasons, primarily stemming from something really terrible that happened to Lauren when she was young that she just couldn't really discuss with her family, couldn't really discuss with anyone, didn't really even understand what had happened to her. And so she sort of shut down and just became pissed at everybody that they didn't understand what happened to her. But of course, if we don't tell people, they don't know, right? So that's the irony with Lauren, is that she didn't tell anybody, but she's still pissed that they didn't somehow figure it out. And it just never heals. So, this happens when she's a teenager. Now we're set, in her early 20s, and she's still kind of, these wounds are there. But her father's dying of cancer, and she's trying to, be a good daughter and connect with them as much as she can. And her father is an interesting character to me because he is kind of that prairie populist farmer guy. So we tend to think of farming right now, or farmers right now, in a way that sort of frustrates me a little bit. We tend to think of them as uniformly conservative or Trump supporters. But, really the history of farming or farmer political involvement is much more complex than that. So throughout the Midwest, we actually had what's called prairie populist movement that was populist, in other words, power of the people, that had gone on for quite a long time and really gained a lot of traction around the 1980s during the farm crisis when so many farms were being foreclosed on. Dale is that breed of farmer. He is open-minded. He cares about, the land, cares about his bottom line. In Dale's mind, the people who make it hard to make a living off of farming aren't, Democrats or something, or liberals. They're the structural facets of big ag that make it hard, and it's actually really true. Like farmers get very little money per acre. They, they're really fairly exploited by a global agricultural system. So for Dale, that was why his politics were the way they were, was because he identified that the real problem isn't people who want good social programs or health insurance for others. It's people who don't care whether or not he makes a living or loses his land. And of course, interestingly enough, right now, many farmers are supporting Trump. And, I think we're at a situation where for many people, they've been so screwed for so many years by a system that doesn't care. That you get this president in there who's at least saying things that indicate he cares. He's channeling some of their anger at the world that's sort of left them behind. And that's attractive. When you're angry, you don't necessarily want someone coming in and telling you shouldn't be angry and that you're wrong. A lot of times what you want is someone to just let you vent, let you support you in that rage, at least for that moment of time. Unfortunately, Trump just keeps people in a perpetual state of rage by misinformation. And, clearly we're in a second really dramatic farm crisis right now because of the unending trade wars with China and other countries. And unfortunately, farmers are identifying their enemy as, or, the enemy to their economic progress as people who want good things for the world, not this bully who feeds into their hate. So it is true that many farmers now are supporting Trump, but I would say that is definitely not always the case or uniformly the case. There are many farmers who are independent thought or thinkers and are not supporting the president and who care about their land and want good things for the world just as much as everybody. So Dale is of the ilk of this prairie populist type farmer. So he has cancer and he can't farm anymore. So he is kind of like me, a news junkie, and he just sits around all day reading news and listening to news. I don't do that anymore. I can't do it anymore, but I did for many years. So Dale, he can't farm, so he's just learning about all this stuff, and he's freaking out. And he's trying to convey these things to Lauren, his daughter. But, where Lauren is at is, and I think a lot of people are there, and I'm empathetic to this situation, is that if you don't follow news super closely and you don't follow politics very closely, it's very, very easy to be so overwhelmed and confused by what everybody is saying that you just fuck it all. You just tune it all out. I don't care, what anybody is saying. How do you distinguish, one person's point of view from another? But let me just, step into that is a deliberate strategy of the president and the Republican Party, is to sow enough chaos and confusion. It's not only a strategy of the Republican Party. I mean, this is a strategy straight out of Putin's playbook. So, let me get into Russia. The president gets so upset whenever we talk about Russia. People on the far left get upset when we talk about Russia, and people on the far right get upset when we talk about Russia. But I'm going to talk about Russia. The reason I'm going to talk about Russia is because, this is a very well-entrenched strategy. I know a lot of people are thinking, we've only heard about Russia in 2016. Who's ever heard about Russian disinformation? Well, Russia has been putting out disinformation literally since the beginning of the Cold War. So, you can trace back planted stories in newspapers, paid off journalists, things like that, going back literally decades. This is not anything new that Putin is doing. What he's doing, though, is much cheaper and much more effective if all you have to do is put out a bunch of shit online. So it's a fairly affordable and effective strategy because it muddies the waters, it makes it confusing, it turns us against each other. And why does Putin care about any of this? Like, why would he care? I think that's one of the things that people go, don't be mean to the, I know, what is it? So one of my friends, he says to me, we can't bully Russia. We can't blame a whole country. Well, I'm not blaming a whole country. I'm sorry. Russian people, I'm very sorry that is your president. So no, I am not blaming you. I am talking about your dictator, and that is Vladimir Putin. And why does he want to do this? Well, let's see. Russia and the U.S. were fairly equivalent superpowers. We always kind of had the advantage in a lot of ways, but fairly equivalent superpowers, up until, the fall of the Soviet Union. And since then, Russia has been in a very precipitous decline as a world power. And, that's upsetting to Russian pride. Russians are very proud people, as they should be. I have a wonderful history of very important things. But their decline was so steep and sharp, it was humiliating to a lot of people. So just like Trump coming into our country and telling us, make America great again, I got all the answers, I'm going to fix it all. That's what strong men do. I presume strong women as well. But, strong, they call it a strong man, this dictatorial type personality. They convince people that there's easy answers. Well, let me tell you, there's no easy answers really to anything. So if someone's claiming they have the easy answers, you really need to be a little more skeptical of that. He doesn't have all the answers clearly, but he convinced the Russian people he did, because previous to Putin, we had this drunken fool called Boris Yeltsin in there who was making just an absolute embarrassment of the country, okay? So everyone sees this strong, tough Vladimir Putin, no shirt, riding horses. He's going to fix Russia, right? Okay, so he comes in. He is just as corrupt and criminal as Trump. In fact, no more. Yeah, he's probably more. Many people don't know that Vladimir Putin is probably the richest man in the world, but we can't verify his income because he is so closely tied to mob money. He's basically the head of the Russian mafia for all intents and purposes, and he requires bribes for everything. So Russia is basically just a failing state that is propping him up. But if he uses all this good rhetoric around, him being strong, Russia being strong, he's making Russia great again, and he contrasts that with what had been a beacon of hope. Now, U.S. has always had its problems. Let's not kid ourselves with that. However, I think a lot of people in the United States maybe don't realize how much our democracy is looked at as a beacon around the world, and our rights are looked at as something important for people to strive towards. But if Putin is able to look at the U.S. and put up U.S., which they're doing, Sputnik, RT, please God, don't watch RT. Don't listen to Sputnik. It's propaganda bullshit, but whatever. But what they're doing is trying to get the message out that the U.S. is basically just fucked. Why look up to the U.S.? Look how stupid we are. We're, not handling coronavirus. We've got all these protests. All this stuff that's going on. So this is what Putin is doing to the rest of the world is primarily about his internal politics. He wants to stay in power, and he knows the best way to stay in power is by convincing the Russian people that there's no better alternative. You might as well stick with this guy because everybody else is screwed too. That's internal politics, okay? So we've seen the other thing that it's doing is helping to put Russia on a national stage again as a formidable power. And then let's just jump ahead to climate change a little bit. The other thing that Putin is wanting to do is gain control of the Arctic because once climate change melts those glaciers, there's going to be a lot of oil under there that he wants to gain control of. So, and he is interested in his own power, aggrandizement, and money. And so all of these things feed into his agenda, his personal agenda. So I think we can't forget that these are actual personalities that we're dealing with here. These are actual human beings. Putin isn't some boogeyman. He's a real human with his own interests in mind. So, a lot of people, when they want to dismiss the interference in the 2016 election, they seem to not realize that these same strategies that he is using to fuck with us, he's using around the entire world. We're seeing this in Belarus, literally right now. Brexit, so much of the Britain breaking away from the EU, that was fueled by Russian misinformation, Russian propaganda. So I think, we just have to be wary of motivations behind why certain information is coming out the way it is and how it's being framed, and always bearing in mind that almost everything, this type of thing that's coming out is specifically to divide us as a country. And that is one of the reasons why I said, earlier in this broadcast that I attempt to, as much as possible, not allow politics to divide me from other people, because I know that's the underlying goal behind this misinformation. And so I want us all to keep that in mind too, even if we very much politically disagree with each other. It doesn't mean we have black hearts. It doesn't mean we're fools. It can mean that we maybe don't have all the information, and that there's a lot of reasons for that go back decades and decades. So just bear that in mind. The American people are not necessarily your enemy. Your neighbors aren't your enemy. But that doesn't mean we don't have problems and that there aren't some really scary people in the world. And some of them maybe are our enemy, like the militias. So, okay, so let's see. So that's pretty much, chapter 1. So I started talking about Dale. So Dale's all obsessed, her father, obsessed with news. He's trying to warn Lauren about what's going down on election night 2022. So the first chapter is election night 2022. So then Lauren is just like, yeah, whatever. I don't even care about any of this. It's all bullshit. I'm not interested in any of this. So she tunes out her father. She goes to work. She's there at the bar working that night during the election. Things, I don't want to give away too much here, but I guess I can give this away. Basically, the president declares a state of emergency, shuts down the 2022 midterm elections, and from that point forward, my novel is, I don't even talk about the president. I'm just building the world that he's created by his chaos. So from this, from chapter 1 on, we're presuming that Trump or Trump's family are staying in power. And so I also want to address that just briefly. So clearly President Trump is not a young man, and he's not in the greatest of health, right? But he has made many jokes about Ivanka becoming president. And, there's a lot of people who think maybe that's not super far from what their ideas are. Ivanka and Jared have a very prominent role in the White House, nepotism at its finest. And there's a lot of people who believe that Kushner and Ivanka are behind a lot of the president's decisions, and that they're the true power center in the White House. And so, I don't know if that's true or not, obviously, but in my novel, that's the reality that I create, is that Kushner and his lovely wife Ivanka are the true power centers, and that basically they take over after the president. But here's the thing. I've spent most of this broadcast so far talking about the president, but my book isn't really about the president. The book is about the after effects of a dictatorship taking hold in this country, a racist dictatorship taking hold in this country that cares nothing about climate change. So climate change, is a controversial subject for some people, but in most of the rest of the world, they just accept the science and they've moved on. Here, we're still fighting about it. Partially why it's that division stuff, right? We also know oil companies have a very highly vested interest in getting us to be confused. So basically, almost anyone with a lot of power can just create confusion. You don't have to convince people you're right. The oil companies don't have to convince us that climate change isn't real. They just have to convince us that it's confusing and ambiguous, right? Okay, so that's where we're at right now. So we've got the president declaring a state of emergency at the end of chapter 1, and then the next chapter jumps ahead a decade in the future. And so then we don't really talk about the president ever again in the rest of the novel, because he is not, a lot of conservatives claim that those of us who don't like the president are obsessed with him somehow, that we just hate him so much that we can't even think, we're so confused by hatred, I guess. And so that was part of the reason why I didn't really want to dwell on the president in this book. But more, it was, the president is a means to an end of a lot of wealthy and powerful people. He is part and parcel of the Republican Party. And all of these folks who are caring more about, the one percenters, they care more about their own situation in the world than they do about anybody else, right? Okay. So I didn't feel the need to obsess about Trump because, he's a bad guy, and all that. He's a horrible person, in my opinion. But more importantly, Trump does horrible things. If he were just a horrible person, fine, be a horrible person. I don't give a shit, But if you're going to do horrible things with your policies that affect other people, that's where I give a shit. So that's why I hate the president. So just for any of you Trump supporters who might be listening, I don't hate the president because he's obnoxious. I don't hate the president just because he says rude things. I do hate him for those reasons, but whatever. I hate the president because of the world that he's creating, and the divisions he's creating, and the destruction that he is creating. So that is my problem with the president. Okay, so let's see. I'm going to talk a little bit about chapter 2 now. Jumping ahead 10 years, like I said. The world isn't so great anymore, climate change has continued, to get worse. And, last year, the Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change said we have about a decade to start addressing these issues before what are called feedback loops that are going to get so entrenched that we won't be able to do much about it. So if we don't, so the president literally denies that climate change exists. And not only is not doing anything about it, he's actually doing a lot of things to make it a lot worse. For example, just recently he rolled back a rule that said oil and gas companies can just vent methane into the air as much as they want. Methane is actually a more potent greenhouse gas than carbon dioxide. So, so in this world I'm creating, not only has climate change not been addressed in any way, it's actually been continued to be fueled, and feedback loops are kicking in because it's not ever been taken care of. So we're seeing, unusual weather. Sorry, I'm just looking at this. Why are we only doing? Okay. I'm just looking at some of the comments. I think what I'm going to do is towards the end of this, I might try jumping on the comments. If you have questions, throw them in the feed, please. I'll try to get to those too, okay? But I think I'm not going to be able to really effectively watch or talk and address your comments right now. So anyway, okay, so we're jumping ahead. Climate change is, feedback loops are kicked in. It's getting substantially worse. The white nationalists have gained enough power that they're the de facto police force for the country, or the kind of the controlling force of the country. Their agenda is what's being put forth by the president and his supporters. So that's where we get. Lauren's got a new job. She's not a waitress anymore. She's working in a pet store, and she's still struggling with bad relationships. She's still got some bad guys around. But we don't talk about any of her boyfriends at this point. We're still kind of just sort of that's in the background. She's got bad boyfriends. She's at the pet store. A couple friends of her father come in. Her father's long since died, and they're kind of bringing some stuff up from her dad. It's sort of, kind of bringing up some emotion for her. And she finds out something unexpected from these fellas, and it surprises her. It takes her aback. And so I don't want to reveal what that is, but kind of a shocking discovery. And so she feels this need to go and talk to her coworker about this discovery. So we meet Craig, and I don't want to give too much away from Craig because it would be quite a bit of a spoiler. But this chapter for me was both, it's one of my favorite chapters and one of the saddest chapters, because I'm trying to play out where the president's policies will go. Again, that's my agenda in this novel, is not about the president as a human being. It's about the president's policies. How does the country change over time if we continue with the same trajectory we are on now? And so, in this world, it's filled with a lot of homeless people. There's a lot of trash, high winds and heat from the climate change. Farming is getting harder. There's, more difficulty with keeping our food system going. There's also one of the things that I think is important to realize, and we're seeing this a bit right now in the pandemic, is that our country, or much of the world actually at this point, the modern world, is set up on a kind of an on-demand thing. So like if you want, for instance, even my novel, you put in an order, the thing gets produced and then sent to you, right? We don't have like warehouses of books, warehouses of things everywhere. It's usually produced as needed and shipped as needed. But we don't as citizens look at all the systems that go into place to get that there. For example, let's just take farming. With farming, you need to have the seeds, you need to have the inputs, you need to have the gasoline to run the tractors, you need to have the tractors operating, you need to have farmers willing and able to do this work, you need to have farm workers willing and able to do this work, which of course the president's war against immigration has created a lot of difficulty for farmers getting a stable workforce. You need to have, let's just say it's beef or something, you need to have people working in the slaughter houses to get that meat packaged, the plastic coming to you, all of that, to get it to the grocery store. We don't see any of that, right? We just go to the grocery store, we buy our little package, and it's all good, right? But in this world, all of those systems that made that happen without thought going into it on our part, those have broken down. And, I'll say one of the things that I used to inform this world that I was creating when I wrote this novel was that, I've spent a lot of time in other countries. So I've traveled to a lot of what would be called poor countries. And frankly, they're some of my favorite places to be, because I feel like often people are very kind and genuine in a way that money can corrupt and changes the way people treat each other. Once you achieve certain level of middle classness, I guess. But the facet of those countries that kind of informed my novel was that life is often really hard in these countries. For instance, like we're seeing this coin shortage right now. I remember in India, trying to get change for something was like this sometimes half an hour process, because they wouldn't have change and they'd have to go and collect the coins from different places and, all of this stuff, or, you wanted something and, literally you would have to have somebody make it for you because, apologies for my puppy barking in the background there. But, just the systems that make life so comfortable and convenient, we're already seeing breaking down a little bit with COVID. And in this world of mine, as the economy has continued to collapse, climate change has continued to make things hard, and just chaos. You're just not seeing, you're not seeing the world functioning in the same way, okay? So that's what we're seeing. Lauren in the pet store, world isn't functioning quite the same way. There's problems with the money, for instance. So one of the things we're seeing is, let me back up for a second. One of the things I don't think people really realize about government, when people kvetch, government is bullshit, blah, 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 nobody cares. I think one of the things we don't realize is that government runs a lot of stuff, again, that we don't see happening. Like, for instance, replacing worn out paper money. Who even thinks about that, right? Money has to be replaced every few years. But one of the consequences of President Trump's corrupt administration is that he literally gives jobs to people who just like him. They don't have to have any competence. They don't have to have any skills. They don't have to be effective. They're basically other corrupt pricks or bitches like him. They're just awful. So we see Steve Mnuchin, and he's running the Treasury Department. Does he have any skills or expertise? No. We're already, that's what I think in part why we're seeing the coin shortage right now. I think this is unnecessary. We're the richest country in the world, for God's sakes. Don't even be having a coin shortage. But in this world, his cronies continue to just basically screw up government on every goddamn level, and every function of government that had previously gone on, again, seamlessly without us really noticing, is no longer there. So one of the facets I'm highlighting here is, Lauren gets money from these guys, and it's so worn she doesn't even know if she should use it. That was another thing I experienced actually in Mexico many, many years ago, was I was buying a dress, and the pesos that I had were very worn. And we were in this little bitty tiny Mayan village in the Yucatan, and the seamstress who I bought the dress from was freaked out because I gave her this bill and she didn't want to say anything to me directly, but I was on a school trip. She went and talked to my professor. It was like, I got this money and I don't think I can use it because the money's so worn, And so do we even think about that? No. In this world, you do. So let's think about those facets of government as well, right? Okay, so then Lauren goes back. She's freaked out about this whole interaction with these guys. She wants to talk to her coworker, Craig. And I'm not going to reveal too much about it because there's too many spoilers. But essentially, we're already seeing the roll. I'll just give a little teeny tiny spoiler. We're already seeing the rolling back of rights of minority groups, right? Particularly at this juncture. Well, no, many more minority groups, but one of the minority groups is the LGBTQIA community. So those folks who consider themselves non-straight or not standard gender, but cisgendered, for those people, they are really, and I'm included among them, our rights were given to us by the Supreme Court essentially a few years ago. They're not super strong, right? They can be easily overturned. Rights for people who are considered a little different or weird, particularly the trans community, they're not always real popular. There's a lot of people who are perfectly happy to sacrifice those people because they say they're mentally ill or, some other problem. They have some other moral problem with these folks. So unfortunately, my community in that respect has become sacrificial lambs. And what we're going to be likely seeing with the change in the Supreme Court now, I don't know that gay marriage will be continuing. We're already seeing rolling back of trans rights. And in this world that I've created, the president and his folks have just, we're just expendable. So the chapter concludes with some very interesting reveal around one of the other characters and kind of the life experience they've had under this oppression of the Trump regime. So that's chapter 2. Encourage you to check that out. I think I'm going to do a little reading. Yeah, let me do a little reading of that chapter. Okay. Is this what I want to read? Nah, I don't want to read that. Sorry, I picked something out and I'm like, I don't want to read that. Yeah, let's start here. I like this better. Lauren, so the guys who were like the freaky interaction, they just left. Okay. So Lauren watched as they bent against the wind. Lauren braced against the rush of emotion. Jack had inadvertently brought to the surface a multitude of sore points, and Lauren could not handle processing it. She shoved the thoughts away into the little drawers in her mind and turned her attention to the creepiness of the guinea pig conversation. She was horrified thinking about their teensy carcasses roasting in a hot dish pan, but she also realized that it wasn't much different from rabbits or chicken or any other farm animal for that matter. Meat is meat. Still, the topic would be something Craig would find amusing. He'd been friendlier with her lately, and he'd gotten a glimpse. I'm not reading very well, and she had gotten a glimpse of a wry humor that matched her own. She locked the front doors and posted her cell number in the window in case anyone else came. Lauren found Craig on the concrete floor with a clipboard in his hand, sorting through a ragged collection of miscellanies. Lauren walked with a little swagger in her step as she savored the thought of his reaction. Craig saw her as she came in and smiled politely. Lauren turned on her charm and bubbled out, "Hey, Craig, you'll never guess what just happened." He raised his eyebrows and said with a deadpan sarcasm, "What? Tell me." Lauren felt glee that she had indeed broken through. "It's so freaky. These guys I know, or kind of know. I guess they knew my dad, or the dad knew my dad." Craig put his hand up in exasperation. "Lauren, girl, you're killing me. What happened?" Okay, I'm not going to tell you because that'll be a spoiler. So I also wanted to read that section, I think, because I want to get a sense that the book is not just, or the novel is a novel, it's a story. It's not just, like heavy politics or heavy stuff all the time. It's heavy. But but there's a story to it, and people have found the story to be engaging, and like they've been able to flow through it. So that's why I read that little section. So let's see. Chapter 3, party-related hoopla. That was a fun chapter to write too. This was one of the first chapters I wrote, actually. I wrote my book in a kind of a strange way because I didn't know what I was doing. I wrote lots of parts in different sequences, and then they would come together in one way and then separate and then come together in a different way. And so my novel has been arranged and rearranged numerous times since I started it last year. So this chapter is now chapter 3. But yeah, it was one of the first chapters I wrote. So let's see. In this chapter, she's still working at the pet store. We meet a different coworker, an older lady named Claudia, who's having a graduation party for her son. And, one of the things I'm talking about in this chapter is kind of the lack of opportunity for folks or for young people. So, again, modeling a lot of my world building on what we see happening already and have been happening in other countries for many years. I mean, even like Italy. Let's just take Italy. Italy is not a poor country. Italy is not a third world country. But Italy has massive youth and professional unemployment. The economy can't sustain the number of new professionals coming into it who've gone to college and who want good jobs. And we see that in many, many places around the world. And we're seeing it, unfortunately, more and more now, not just now with COVID. There's the joke about the college, the barista with the college degree, right? So we're seeing this happening more and more here in the U.S., but in this world I've created, it's obviously accelerated dramatically and would probably be on par with something like like a Saudi Arabia or something to that effect, where there's just massive numbers of young, highly educated young people who aren't able to find jobs. The myth that you just need to pull yourself up by your bootstraps. Well, if you don't have a society with bootstraps to hold on to, there's not really a lot of getting ahead, right? So this graduation party for her son, was supposed to be this like crowning achievement for him, right? She'd been looking forward to it, since he was a little kid. And she'd saved and scrimped so he could go to the best schools, private schools, because our public school system, in my world building, someone like Betsy DeVos in charge, the public school system just continues to deteriorate. So Claudia's gone the extra mile to pay for private schooling for her son, hoping for some sort of like Ivy League type education. But the other facet of this economic disaster that our country finds itself in is that also a lot of people can't even go to college. So graduation parties are less and less. A lot of young people are just dropping out of school altogether to help with their families and to help make ends meet. So this is kind of unusual to have a graduation party. Okay, and then the other thing I talk about in chapter, so I'm using the graduation party to talk about that. I'm also talking about some of the hunger, the pervasive hunger. So, Claudia has this party and she's, it's a party, right? Well, like, it's inundated. There's like 1 million people there, and it's, people are hungry. They're looking for a free meal. And kind of like people coming, because, we have a world of haves and have-nots now already, right? But in this world, and we're seeing this already, wealth inequality is just becoming extreme. And so you have some people who kind of held on to some degree of a middle-class existence who aren't super clued in how hard it is for other people. And so Claudia's one of those. And at this party, she's kind of finally having the realization, like, there's a lot of really desperate people in the world. So I'm using the party to kind of highlight that and highlight some of the ways our food system, our agricultural systems are declining. We also are going to meet Brian, the horrible man who ruined, or at least partially ruins Lauren's life. So we meet Brian at the end of this party. He's there. But the section I want to read from this chapter is about religious extremism. So religious extremism plays a pretty prominent role in this novel as well. I've long been concerned about extremism of all sorts. Coming from a background, my own religious background is pretty much, my dad was agnostic, my mother was an atheist, didn't really know what I believed for many years. I now consider myself a spiritual person. I have a church, all that business, but I do not want anybody telling me what to do based on their religion, right? I want, morality, of course, but not religion. Those are very different things. And so if your religion says life begins at conception and birth control should not be allowed because that's your religion, that should not be how I have to live my life because that's your view. And so I think, there's just a lot of concern, and of course we're going to see that with Amy Coney Barrett. It'll be really interesting to see what happens in the Supreme Court, and religious extremism. And so in my novel, we talk a lot about religious extremism in this country. We really do. But which religion are we talking about? Are we talking about Christianity very often? Or have we kind of scapegoated a different religion? And I think we all know the answer to that, right? We've scapegoated Islam. Obviously there are Muslim extremists. I mean, who can deny that? We had the World Trade Center bombing, Osama bin Laden, all this stuff, a horrible Al-Shabaab in Somalia, and Taliban and Afghanistan, horrible people. But it's not because they're Muslim that makes them horrible. They're horrible people who happen to be Muslim and use Islam as justification for their horribleness, right? We're seeing the same thing in this country with Christian extremism. So, being Christian makes you no more likely to be an extremist than anybody else, or more likely, you're no more likely to be a Christian extremist because you're Christian than a Muslim person is to be a Muslim extremist because they're Muslim, right? But we don't really understand it very well here in this country. We tend to see Islam as this foreign religion that is trying to hurt us, and that there's like this cultural war between Islam and Christianity, okay? And so in part, what's come of that is a bolstering of Christian extremism. And by that, I don't mean just Christian people who have intense beliefs. I have literally zero problem with anybody being as religious as they want to be, as long as they don't try to make anybody else follow their religious laws. But what we're seeing is this perception among the most conservative Christians, and pulling in those who maybe aren't as conservative, but pulling them in under this guise of Christianity is under attack. That we need to defend against this faith so that, the infidels and all these people are not corrupting it, whatever. But, the thing that's ironic is almost this exact goddamn language is being used by the extremists of all these other religions to justify their hatred of other religions. So, as much as these Christian extremists want to complain about, not Christian extreme, as much as people want to complain about Islamic extremism, the language coming out of the most extreme Christians is just as bad. And in fact, later on in the novel, I'm discussing a concept called white Sharia. I mean, they've even, embraced this concept of, oppression of women under this concept of Sharia, but they refer to it as white Sharia, so that makes it okay, I guess. Not so much. Very, very extreme views. But because most people in this country are Christian, we tend to not see this form of extremism as a threat. It's much of it is, obviously they're very good at how they, excuse me, my little noisy things here. They're very good at how they explain it in a way that makes it seem less threatening, that makes it seem as if they're just defending their religion against other bad people or what have you. And I just think, what am I trying to say here? We haven't really embraced the concept of how dangerous extremist Christians are. And I'm not talking to you normal Christians out there. I'm talking about the crazy ones who are so extreme that they believe in, violence and, oppression of other people under the guise of their religion. That basically, it's the same thing all over the damn world. So we're seeing a rise in fundamentalism of all religions, in fact, right now. Not just Christian. Islamic fundamentalism, Christian fundamentalism. And then I'm going to talk about India for just a second, because that's really, India's really kind of broken my heart. I spent almost 4 months there back in my 20s, and it was just such a beautiful place to be. I mean, there was just, I'm sure lots of religious strife back then, but nothing I observed. There was Muslim women running around their little, often very colorful hijabs, and nobody batted an eye. I never heard one word about anybody hating Islam, nothing. And then, now fast forward, we've got this Modi, I can't pronounce his name, Narendra, I think it is. Narendra Modi, who is the elected president of India now, and he rose to power. He's a very Trumpian-like guy. He rose to power, almost all these dictators do this. Let's get this pattern down in our brains, okay? They all do the same playbook. They're the ones who can solve it. They have easy answers. It's us against them. They set up a straw man. They set up an enemy. So in the case of India, the Hindu Nationalist Party has said that, Islam is the enemy. And so they are using this, or he is using it in the Nationalist Party as a justification for massive repression and violence against Muslim people. I have a Buddhist friend who got pissed when I said this, but I don't give a fuck. It's true. In Myanmar, you have Buddhist extremism. And I know Buddhism, we all think of it as like this lovely religion, and it is. But every religion has crazy people. And in Myanmar, you have a contingent of Buddhists who believe, again, against Muslims, that the Muslims are trying to take over the country, blah, 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 and so that they need to oppress the Muslim people. So we've seen intense violence and ethnic cleansing in Myanmar, perpetuated by Buddhists. How sad. That just breaks my heart. So, we're seeing this rise in religious extremism around the world. And that concerns me because I do very much believe in religious freedom. I mean, to try to impose your religious views upon somebody else is so anathema to me. I mean, I can't imagine trying to force someone to think what I think or to live by my laws. But in the minds of the religious extremists, if you don't follow their laws, you're violating God or what have you. Okay? So they have to, in their minds, they have to force everyone to live that way. And I think that's where when we get things really very, very dangerous. And I think we're on the precipice of that right now as a country. One of the influences for my novel was, The Handmaid's Tale, which came out, as the Hulu series a few years ago. But it's a novel I read many, many years ago in my 20s. And, I was not Christian, and I could see certain things around me feeling forced upon me, like Christianity being forced upon me as a child that already made me uneasy. And then after reading that novel, I was like, oh my goodness, yeah. And then I started doing a lot of, I'm a news junkie, I'm a nerd, I gather information, especially about things that worried me. So, this rise of fundamentalist Christianity, extremist Christianity, forcing their worldview on other people has been something I've been worried about for a really, really long time. But under the Trump administration, we're seeing it rising to a level we've never seen as a country before. I mean, he's doing things like he and the party. I don't want to just make this about Trump. This is also about the Republican Party. So I think it was Texas? Yeah, Texas. Last week, the Republican Party there said that social workers no longer... I'm not going to get upset. I feel like I'm crying. But that social workers no longer have to serve clients with disabilities that for some, I don't know why they excluded disabilities. Poor disabled people, they haven't done anything. But in any event, social workers can deny people services. These are publicly paid social workers. These are not, just whatever. They can deny based on disability and sexual orientation. So we're seeing folks' religious views coming into whether or not, we can make choices as individuals based on their religion. We're seeing this more and more all the time with the Supreme Court confirmation of Amy Coney Barrett. I know I've talked to her about her a couple times, but, this is pretty serious, guys, because, now we have a very split Supreme Court, and she has expressed extremely controversial views on such things as when life begins, voting rights, things like that, rights of minorities, and some of this is based on this very extremist religious point of view. She, I know nobody wanted to talk about it during the confirmation process, but she's part of an extreme Catholic group. Does that mean Catholics are bad? No, that does not mean Catholics are bad. I have many Catholics who I know and I love. This is nothing about Catholics. This is about some extremist division of her church, her faith, that very much believes that they should impose their will upon everyone else. Because again, these religious extremists believe that they will displease God if they don't make us all live that way, okay? They have to usher in this world on God's behalf, okay? So we all have to live that way. And so when I see particularly some of my more conservative friends online talking about Islamic extremism, it gets me a little ruffled up because sure, we have some Islamic extremism in this country that is dangerous. We obviously had 9/11, that horrible shooting out in California, whatever that was, the husband and wife. We obviously have some bad stuff. And I'm not saying that there aren't Islamic extremists. But the majority are just normal people, just like me and you, okay? And I'm not saying all Christians are extremists. The majority are normal people like me and you. But those small fractions of extremists in whatever religion are trying to impose their will upon all of us. And I think we have to be vigilant about that, especially moving forward as a country, where we're going to be. So in this world that I've created here, we also have another thing, and that is that not only is organized religion more extreme and more intense, but what we see around the world, including in this country, times have passed when there was social upheaval and disruption. You saw a big rise in cult activity and in fringe religious groups that again purport to have the easy answers. So again, nobody has easy answers, but desperate people buy into it, right? So I love this little scene because this is about just regular missionaries, not of a particular faith. So the other thing, I'm obsessed with cults. I've been obsessed with cults and groupthink and all this stuff literally forever. And I listened to this podcast called Cults for probably 2 years. It was kind of my distraction from the news, but it was interesting how many of these cults shared so much in common, and literally almost every one of their leaders is a narcissistic sociopath. So that sounds familiar, doesn't it? But another facet of these cults is that because the leaders are, very smart and let's just say narcissists are often more emotionally tuned in with other people than normal people, okay? So even though they don't feel the feelings, they are able to read and sense the thoughts or the vulnerabilities and the emotions of other people better than most people. So that makes them even more dangerous and able to manipulate. So in this new world that I've created, we're going to have a lot of cults and we're going to have a lot of manipulation in addition to kind of concerns about organized religion. And so Lauren is getting accosted by some missionaries as she's trying to leave to get to that party we referred to forever ago. Sorry, I'm very rambly. Probably should have prepared a script, but whatever. Okay, so here we are. The day of the party, Lauren resolved not to be late as usual. She headed out to the Jeep that she'd been piecing together, rusted and loud. She was proud to be making out the door on time when she caught a car pulling into her driveway. She could already guess who it was and prepared herself for the onslaught of proselytism. Lauren believed in Jesus, just not the version that so many seemed to be peddling. Even her family's church had become too much, if she were being honest with herself. Lauren's God was one of love and light. A middle-aged man and 20-something woman pulled up in a battered sedan. Lauren spied his shiny red tie and her button-up blouse as they got out. They were all delighted smiles for having caught a prospect out and about. The man started first, coughing to clear his throat, the seemingly omnipresent smoke from the forest fires in the north being particularly thick that day. "Excuse me, ma'am, but we're here to spread the word that the end times are upon us," he proclaimed in a long, drawled accent. He swayed his arms toward the ground as if he were summoning the apocalypse himself. "You must take Jesus into your heart as your personal Lord and Savior with me now, or suffer the wrath of the Lord." Anger and desperation mingled together in his voice. Missionaries no longer trifled with niceties and benign preambles. Their competition for converts and money was fierce. They spewed their blather at anyone who they could get to stand still long enough to listen. Some newly sprouted churches strictly adhered to one faith tradition or another, but so often they mixed and matched whatever religion, spiritual idea, or New Age fantasy that could help them stand out from the pack and catch the right person on the right day to bring them into their fold. Difficult times had everyone grasping for answers, including Lauren, although she was searching more in matters of the heart than the soul. Lauren tapped her foot in impatience and crossed her arms over her chest. She tried to be kind but firm. "I already have a church, but thank you." She didn't want to leave until they'd driven off, having heard rumors of ransacked homes. The man pushed on. "The 4 horsemen are coming, little missy, and you'd better ask yourself if you're ready." He wagged his plump finger at her as his moon-shaped face reddened. The woman howled. "It's in the scripture! It's in the scripture!" She held her palms open with her arms raised and shaking. She seemed possessed for a moment, and Lauren hoped she wouldn't start speaking in tongues like the last one had. As suddenly she began, the shouting stopped, and the woman produced pamphlets from her bag. She handed them to Lauren, who reached out to grab them, instantly annoyed with herself for having done so. The woman had a frailty in her that invoked Lauren's pity. Knowing better, yet acting anyway, Lauren reached into her purse and pulled out a handful of bills, almost without value due to inflation. She hoped a donation would assuage them. Lauren hadn't meant to toss the money, but neither had reached out fast enough, and she couldn't stop her fingers from flicking it away. Lauren was quite done with the entire situation. The heat roiling off the driveway was making her even more irritable than she would have been otherwise. "Please, I need you to leave now." And as the man squatted to pick up the bills, the woman gently plucked back her pamphlets, accurately sensing that she was not to gain a convert anytime soon. Most missionaries had quotas to meet and had to supply their own materials for the job. "Thank you, ma'am. We'll be back around to check on you," the man said with an ominous grin as they headed for the car. "May you find the light, miss," the woman said sincerely before she climbed into the passenger seat. "May you find the light, too." Sorry. My children are jumping very loudly upstairs and getting my dog very excited, and it looks like several children are coming down. I'm going to just try to finish this up real quick, and please, children, leave me alone. Okay, let me finish this, get a little closer so you could actually hear. I'm going to start over. "May you find the light, miss," the woman said sincerely before she climbed into the passenger seat. "May you find the light, too," Lauren thought as the car sped away. So, the missionaries are not necessarily nefarious. Lots of people have lots of beliefs and things from their own hearts. They're not trying to hurt other people, and I think that's what I was trying to portray with that female missionary. She's not trying to cause any problems. She, sincerely believes she's trying to, bring Lauren into the right path. So, I think with that though, I have been very long-winded, more long-winded than I intended, and I've only covered 3 chapters. So I'm going to keep trying to plug away at covering the rest of this novel. I think I've given so much background on like the president and kind of why I wrote the novel and all that, that in future broadcasts I'm just going to jump into the chapters and, you know, maybe do some of the headlines and things like that like I did with this. But I'm not going to do as much background information on everything, okay? So I'm going to take a minute here, and before I go, though, and pull up my comments and questions and see if there's anything I can answer for y'all before I sign off. So let's see. I see there's lots of things that have come through. I don't know all what. I haven't been able to read it. Okay. Give me a second to load. Okay. Mostly just looks like comments. Yeah, it doesn't look like a lot of questions on here. So, but I know James Meyer, I swear I saw a question from you a few minutes ago that I wanted to, or I thought I saw a question mark at least. Oh my goodness. Got all these notifications jumping up that are blocking my capacity to see this. Sorry. This isn't super fun to be sitting here through. Yeah, all these notifications just keep popping up. They're making me insane. Okay, for some reason... Oh, wait, there we go. Okay, my computer was being weird. I couldn't see the comments. At least the dog is barking when nothing's going on. Oh my goodness, my children, they are so loud. My dog is so loud. I'm surprised it's been as quiet as it has been, though. You know what? There's some problem with my computer. It's not pulling up the comments. That's unfortunate. Yeah, I don't know why I would not be doing that. So, unfortunately, James, Meyer, whoever else, if you had any questions, I'm not going to be able to answer them tonight. Unless I held my phone in this awkward and strange way to do so, and that seems weird. Let me try refreshing it one more time. Why? ¿Por qué no? Sorry, guys. My computer it will only let me see the last 4 comments on my computer. So I'm sorry about that. I'm not going to be able to answer any questions. But I will look at them and I can reply to this stream later. So that'll be it for now, guys. Thank you for all of those who stuck with me through this whole broadcast. And this was a little less stressful than I had anticipated. So awesome. All right. Okay. Good night, everybody. Figure out how to shut this off now. How do I